Before we jump headfirst into the Excel C, I want to review some terminology and perhaps introduce you to some different names for various items. Let's begin with how Excel appears upon startup. This view is called the Backstage view. In a sense, it sits behind any currently open workbooks or worksheets. Upon starting Excel, nothing is open, and so this is the view you're presented with. At Open, the only options are to load a recently opened workbook or create a new workbook from any available templates. Each of the displayed squares represents a different available template. Templates can be quite useful, but for this course, we'll mainly use the standard blank workbook template. Once you're inside a specific Excel workbook, the Backstage view can be accessed at any time by clicking on the File button in the upper left corner. The Backstage view is an area for performing many tasks that impact the whole workbook or the Excel application, such as creating new workbooks, opening saved workbooks, saving workbooks, printing, exporting, publishing, and other application-level commands. Very little of our course will spend any time in the Backstage view, however it will prove useful in your own work eventually. In order to exit the Backstage view, you'll need to click this back arrow rather than the X in the upper right corner. The X will close Excel, a mistake that I will often make. Within Excel, our user interface along the top of the screen consists of the Quick Access bar running along the very top, the ribbon interface directly below the access bar, the formula bar, and the name box. The Quick Access bar contains clickable buttons that are defined by the user. These buttons are useful for frequently used commands that you do not want to search the ribbon for. The ribbon is the main component of Excel's interface where most of the available commands can be found. The ribbon itself is organized into separate tabs, with each tab providing a different grouping of commands and options. Throughout the course, I will generally refer to specific tabs by their name. For example, I might point out that the Formulas tab contains options for managing the current calculation options. Some items within tabs, or even some of the tabs themselves, may be context sensitive. This means that the tab or option on a tab will only appear under certain scenarios. For example, the Chart Tools tabs will only appear when I have a chart selected. Throughout the course, I'll try to indicate any contextually sensitive objects so that you can make note of them. The grouping of commands does not stop at tabs, though. Tabs contain button groups that may or may not have a more detailed interface than available through the ribbon. These are the trickiest buttons. Button groups can be identified by the name along the bottom of the ribbon and centered among a clearly defined set of buttons. For example, if I look at the Home tab, I can identify the groups Clipboard, Font, Alignment, and others. Consider the Alignment button group. If you look carefully, you can see a little button to the bottom right side of the grouping. This button opens up a far more detailed cell formatting window than can be achieved using the formats along the standard ribbon commands. On the other hand, the Cells button group does not have a button. For such commands, I'll indicate that you should go to the Advanced button for the desired button group. For any buttons with an arrow, these are lists of commands available for use. I will refer to these as drop-down boxes. For example, I might ask you to go to the Home tab, and under the Clear drop-down, select the Clear Formats command. Now that we've made it past the ribbon, we can talk about the name box and the formula box. The name box is a very useful option for selecting an existing named range or quickly creating a new one. We'll discuss this box in significant detail in Chapter 3. The formula bar is immensely important in Excel. This bar will contain whatever formula or value is entered into a specific cell. While the standard Excel setting is to allow editing of formulas directly within the cells, I do prefer to have that option turned off. You can turn it on or off by going to File, Options, Advanced, and unchecking the Allow Editing Directly in Cells option. By having it unselected, you'll always be able to see my formulas being written directly within this formula bar. Now, in talking about the formula bar, I've jumped ahead a little bit by describing it with relation to cells. I'll come back to the definition of a cell later. In addition to these components, the Excel status bar runs across the bottom of the screen to round out our user interface. The status bar will include various tidbits of information, with that information being customizable by the user. We'll revisit the status bar in more depth later. Everything I've discussed so far relates to Excel's user interface. From here on out, I'll be talking about the contents of a specific workbook. Workbooks are made up of one or more individual sheets. These sheets can be seen along the bottom of your screen, with their names appearing on little folder tabs. Your active sheet is the sheet that is currently on screen. This sheet's name will be in bold and in a different color. In the case of my my computer it will show up as a bold green. Your active sheet is also a selected sheet, however not all selected sheets are active sheets. You can select sheets without activating them, and if I select other sheets their names will appear in bold as shown here, however the color of the text will not change. We'll discuss multiple sheet selection in more detail later in this chapter. Sheets can be of two different types, either a chart or a worksheet. We'll talk about charts in Chapter 4, and I'll introduce you to chart sheets at that point. Until then, we'll be using only worksheets. Worksheets are your standard spreadsheet like the one we're looking at here. Worksheets consist of cells organized by rows and by columns. Each cell represents a unique point within a specific worksheet. Every cell has its own specific address, which is defined by the column and row pair that it exists in. For example, my cursor is currently sitting at the crossing of column F and row 9. This crossing defines a specific cell. I will generally refer to one or more cells as a range and reference them based on their column row address. I strongly advise that you become accustomed to this terminology if you move on to more advanced Excel usage, as it will help you become comfortable with VBA and other more advanced techniques. For example, since my cell is sitting in column F and row 9, I would refer to this cell as simply F9 and possibly range F9. A range can consist of one or more cells. The range E5 to G7 consists of all of the cells intersected by the columns E, F, and G, as well as each row 5, 6, and 7. I'll simply refer to this as the range E5:G7. A more specific reference will be to the current selection. The selection will be whatever range I've currently highlighted with my cursor. For example, if I select the cells A2 through A4, any reference I make to my selection would be to these three cells. As with worksheets, selected cells have an active cell and non-active cells. In my current selection, the active cell is the cell that is white, while the inactive cells are gray. The formula bar will only show the value from the active cell, and only one cell can be active at a given point in time. There are many ways to interact with the workbook itself. Left-clicking is generally used for selecting or pressing commands, and I'll simply refer to these as clicks. Right-clicking will access different context menus. Right-clicking on a cell, for example, brings up a series of options specific to the cell you've clicked on. Finally, let's become acquainted with your keyboard. The left and right control keys, generally labeled C, T, R, L, are to the bottom left and bottom right sides of your keyboard at the far ends. The left and right Alt keys, generally labeled A, L, T, can usually be found to either side of the spacebar. There is no difference between using the left or right keys, as they both perform the same actions. However, we will be using them frequently. Another set of important keys will be the function keys along the top of the keyboard. These are the F keys along the top. If you're using a laptop, you may need to use a key combination in order to use the F keys, and you should refer to your laptop information to figure out how. I'll refer to these as F and then the applicable number between 1 and 12. The last key that will get significant use is the Escape key, labeled ESC on most computers. This key is almost universally placed to the top left of the keyboard. As with this video, I'll always display a pop-up of the keyboard commands that I'm using to help you along the way. This is a lot of information, however, you should be familiar with almost everything so far from prior courses or your own experience with Excel. These names and terms will be important for you to follow along with the rest of the course. Throughout the rest of this chapter, I'll be showing you how to interact with Excel quickly and efficiently, largely through keyboard commands and other shortcuts.